The emergency beacon station orbiting Zentara Prime had never seen such chaos. Council leader Zephyr stood in the center of the crystalline chamber, her bark-like skin pale with worry as she watched the holographic displays showing the destruction. Across the galaxy, the Devourers had struck again, this time consuming the entire Kaleri system in less than 3 days. "How many more worlds must we lose before we admit defeat?" asked Ambassador Crix, his crystalline body flickering with distress. Patterns. The Vorthak had lost 6 of their greatest city ships to these mechanical monsters, and his people were beginning to panic. Zephyr looked at the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. The Luminari delegate floated nearby, her energy formed dim with exhaustion from the constant emergency sessions. The Sylvani military advisors whispered among themselves, their leaf-like appendages rustling with nervous energy. All of them were afraid, and they had good reason to be. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever faced. They appeared 3 months ago at the Rim systems, massive mechanical entities that consumed everything in their path. Not just the resources or the planets, but the very essence of civilizations themselves. They absorbed technology, tactics, and knowledge from every species they encountered, growing stronger with each victory. The Zentran Honor Guard held the line for exactly 14 minutes, reported General Vex, his voice hollow with defeat. Our best warriors, trained for centuries in the art of war, and they were torn apart like children playing with toys. The holographic display shifted to show the latest battle reports. The Vorthak's energy shields, once thought impenetrable, had been breached and turned against them. The Luminaries' pure energy weapons were absorbed and redirected with terrifying efficiency. The Sylvani's biological defenses were analyzed and countered within moments of first contact. "They learn too fast," whispered Dr. Nala, the Council's chief xenobiologist. "Every strategy we deploy, every weapon we use, every tactic we try becomes useless after the first encounter. They adapt faster than we can innovate." Zephyr closed her eyes and felt the weight of 10,000 years of galactic civilization pressing down on her shoulders. The Council had maintained peace across the stars for longer than most species could remember. They had solved conflicts through diplomacy, advanced their societies through cooperation, and built a paradise among the stars. Now it was all crumbling, and she was helpless to stop it. "There must be something we haven't tried," she said, though even she could hear the desperation in her own voice. "Some alliance we haven't considered, some weapon we haven't deployed." The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of the station's systems. Everyone knew they had exhausted their options. The greatest military minds in the galaxy had thrown everything they had at the Devourers, and nothing had worked. They were facing extinction, and there seemed to be no way out. Ambassador Crix shifted uncomfortably, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light in nervous patterns. "There is one possibility," he said slowly, as if the words themselves were painful, "though it goes against everything we have believed for the past 2 centuries. The other delegates turned to look at him, hope and fear warring in their expressions. Zephyr felt her heart sink as she realized what he was about to suggest. "The humans," Crix continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Deathworlders from the Sol system." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several delegates began speaking at once, their voices raised in shock and dismay. The Luminari delegate's energy form flickered with what could only be described as horror. General Vex's military advisors began arguing among themselves in hushed, urgent tones. "Absolutely not," declared Commander Thane, the Sylvani's chief military strategist. "We quarantine them for good reason. They are violent, unpredictable, and dangerous. The incident during first contact proved that beyond any doubt." Zephyr remembered that day 200 years ago when humanity had first been contacted by the Galactic Council. The human diplomatic team had seemed normal enough at first, if a bit primitive by galactic standards. But when Ambassador Crix had made what he considered a standard diplomatic greeting, commenting on the human delegation's primitive maternal lineage, one of the humans had responded by striking him with their bare fist. The violence had been shocking not just for its suddenness, but for its intensity. The human had broken 3 of Crix's crystalline appendages before being restrained, and had shown no remorse for the assault. When asked to explain their actions, the human had simply said that no one insulted their mother and got away with it. "They are savages," continued Commander Thane. "They solve problems with violence, they glorify warfare, and they have no concept of civilized behavior. Bringing them into this situation would be like fighting fire with a supernova." "But they do fight," said Dr. Nella quietly. "That's what we're missing, isn't it? We've spent so long building a peaceful civilization that we've forgotten how to wage war." The humans never forgot. The chamber fell silent again as the implications sank in. The Galactic Council had indeed created a peaceful paradise, but in doing so they had bred the warrior spirit out of their species. Their soldiers were trained for ceremonial duties and peacekeeping operations, not for the kind of desperate, bloody conflict that the Devourers represented. "The humans have been isolated in their system for 2 centuries, Zephyr said slowly. "Intelligence reports suggest they've been fighting among themselves almost constantly. Wars on their homeworld, conflicts in their colonies, battles in the void between their space stations. They've had 200 years to perfect the art of warfare while we've been perfecting the art of peace." Ambassador Crix touched his scarred crystalline appendages, the ones that had never properly healed from his encounter with human diplomacy. "They are monsters," he said. "But perhaps monsters are exactly what we need." The debate continued for hours, but Zephyr could see the inevitable conclusion approaching. They were facing extinction, and conventional solutions had failed. The humans might be violent, unpredictable, and dangerous, but they were also the only species in the galaxy that had maintained a warrior culture. "If we do this," she said finally, "we must understand that we're crossing a line that can never be uncrossed. Once we invite the humans into galactic affairs, we cannot simply send them away again. They will demand a place at the table, a voice in council decisions, a role in shaping the future of our civilization." "Better to share the galaxy with monsters than to watch it die," replied General Vex grimly. The vote was close, but it passed. The emergency beacon would be activated, and a message would be sent across the void to the quarantined Sol system. For the first time in 2 centuries, the Galactic Council would reach out to humanity. Not as judges or teachers, but as supplicants begging for help. Zephyr composed the message herself, pouring all of her desperation and hope into the words. "To the warriors of Earth, the galaxy bleeds. We who once called you monsters now beg for your monstrosity. Answer if you still remember mercy for those who showed you none." As the transmission raced across space toward the Sol system, Zephyr wondered if they were making the right choice. The humans might save them, but they might also change everything about galactic civilization. She only hoped that when the dust settled, there would still be something left worth saving. The beacon pulsed once, twice, then went silent. Now all they could do was wait and pray that the monsters they had created would choose to be heroes. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Luna Command, staring out at the blue marble of Earth hanging in the void. The emergency transmission from the Galactic Council had arrived 6 hours ago, and he was still processing the implications. After 2 centuries of isolation, the aliens who had branded humanity as monsters were now begging for their help. "Sir, the Defense Council is ready for your briefing," announced Lieutenant Kate Williams, her voice cutting through his thoughts. Morrison nodded and made his way to the conference room where the most powerful military leaders in the Sol system were waiting. The room fell silent as Morrison entered. General Rick Hayes from the Mars Colonial Defense Force sat at the far end of the table, his weathered face showing the scars of 30 years fighting in the asteroid belt. Senator Lisa Crawford represented the Earth civilian government, her expression skeptical as always when it came to military matters. Captain Steve Johnson attended via hologram from his flagship in the belt. His mining crew turned militia scattered across a dozen asteroid stations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, "we have received a formal request for military assistance from the Galactic Council. The same organization that quarantined us 200 years ago is now asking us to help them fight something called the Devourers. Senator Crawford leaned forward, her political instincts immediately on alert. This could be a trap. They've kept us isolated for 2 centuries, treating us like dangerous animals. Now suddenly they need our help. What's to stop them from using us as cannon fodder and then putting us back in quarantine when the threat is over? General Hayes studied the tactical data on his tablet, his expression grim. According to their intelligence reports, these devourers have already consumed 17 star systems. They adapt to any strategy within minutes, making conventional warfare useless. The aliens are facing extinction, and they know it. Captain Johnson's hologram flickered as he adjusted the transmission from his ship. My people have been monitoring their communications for weeks. The panic is real. Whatever these things are, they've got the entire galaxy running scared. The question is whether we should care about aliens who threw us away like garbage? Morrison activated the main display, showing the tactical analysis his staff had prepared. The Devourers aren't just a threat to alien civilizations. If they consume the galaxy, they'll eventually reach our system. We can fight them now with allies, or we can fight them later alone. The debate that followed was intense. Senator Crawford argued passionately for ignoring the alien plea, reminding everyone how humanity had been treated during first contact. The human diplomatic team had been subjected to insults and condescension, and when they had finally responded with violence, the aliens had used it as justification for quarantine. They called us barbarians, Crawford said, her voice rising with old anger. They said we were too violent, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be part of galactic civilization. Now they want us to be violent on their behalf. The hypocrisy is staggering. General Hayes stood and walked to the tactical display, pointing at the data showing devourer movements. Maybe they were right about us being violent. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needs right now. These things have torn through their greatest fleets like paper. Traditional warfare isn't working because they're too civilized to fight dirty. Morrison watched the argument unfold, knowing that the decision would ultimately come down to something deeper than tactics or politics. Humanity had spent 2 centuries in isolation, but they had not spent it idle. They had fought wars on Mars, skirmishes in the asteroid belt, and countless smaller conflicts that had kept their warrior skills sharp. There's something else to consider, Morrison said, calling for attention. Dr. Helen Ross has been analyzing their technical data. Helen, tell them what you found. Dr. Ross stood at the far end of the room, her scientific mind focused on the implications of what she had discovered. The Devourers aren't just consuming matter and energy. They're consuming information, learning from every encounter. They've never faced humans before, which means they have no data on our fighting styles, our psychology, or our capabilities. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Devourers had adapted to every alien tactic because they had encountered similar strategies before. Humans represented something completely new, an unknown variable that might disrupt their learning process. Captain Johnson's voice came through the speakers with new interest. You're saying we might have an advantage because we're the crazy ones they've never seen before. Exactly, Dr. Ross replied. Their adaptation algorithms are based on logical, predictable patterns. Human warfare is often illogical, unpredictable, and driven by emotions they may not understand. We might be able to confuse them long enough to find a weakness. Senator Crawford looked around the room, seeing the shift in mood. Even if we could help them, why should we? They abandoned us when we needed guidance. They could have taught us their ways, helped us become better. Instead, they locked us away and forgot about us. Morrison felt the weight of command pressing down on him. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine not just humanity's future, but potentially the fate of galactic civilization itself. He thought about the message they had received, the desperation in the alien words, the admission that they had been wrong about humanity, because that's what humans do, he said finally. We help people who need help, even if they don't deserve it, even if they've wronged us, even if they might turn on us again when the crisis is over. We help because it's right, not because it's smart. General Hayes nodded slowly. The Mars Colonial Defense Force volunteers for this mission. My people have been training for this kind of fight their entire lives. Captain Johnson's hologram smiled grimly. The Belt Fleet is ready to deploy. We've got enough firepower to glass a planet, and we've been looking for an excuse to use it. Senator Crawford held out for another hour, but eventually she too agreed. To the mission. The formal authorization was signed, and within minutes, orders were being transmitted across the Sol system. 3 fleets would answer the alien call for help, each representing a different aspect of human military capability. Morrison's Terra Fleet carried the planet's best strategic minds and most advanced technology. Hayes' Mars Fleet brought hardened veterans who had learned to fight in the harshest conditions imaginable. Johnson's Belt Fleet provided industrial might and the kind of unconventional tactics that only asteroid miners could devise. As the fleets began their mobilization, Morrison stood once again on the observation deck, watching the bustling activity around Luna Command. Ships that had been mothballed for decades were being brought back online. Soldiers who had trained for wars that might never come were finally getting their chance to fight. The irony was not lost on him. The aliens had quarantined humanity because they were too violent, too willing to fight. Now that same violence might be the galaxy's salvation. The monsters they had created were about to become heroes. Whether the galaxy was ready for them or not, the transmission to the Galactic Council was brief and direct. This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. We have received your message. Help is coming. The human fleets dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zentara system to find a nightmare waiting for them. The once beautiful star system was being consumed by a massive, mechanical structure that wrapped around the local sun like a metallic spiderweb. Devourer ships swarmed through space in perfect formations, their dark hulls gleaming with absorbed energy from the dying star. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the tactical display with growing concern. The alien fleets that had once numbered in the thousands were now reduced to scattered survivors hiding behind the shattered remains of their greatest battleships. The Vorthic city ships that had taken centuries to build were broken and lifeless, their crystalline hulls cracked and dark. Communications, patch me through to the surviving council forces, Morrison ordered. The response came immediately. Desperate transmission from council leader Zephyr herself, broadcasting from what appeared to be a damaged Savani vessel. Human fleet, this is council leader Zephyr. We have been holding position for 6 days, but our defenses are failing. The Devourers adapt to our strategies within minutes of engagement. We have lost over 80% of our forces. Morrison studied the battlefield, his tactical mind already working on the problem. The Devourers moved with machine precision, their formations perfect and their responses coordinated. They had learned from every previous encounter, and now they were using the aliens' own tactics against them with devastating efficiency. This is Admiral Morrison of the United Earth Defense Force. We're here to help. Get your people to safety, and let us work. The human response was immediate and chaotic. Instead of forming the traditional battle lines that the aliens expected, the 3 human fleets scattered in hundreds of different directions. Each ship or small group operated independently, using tactics that seemed random and unpredictable. To the watching aliens, General Hayes led the Mars fleet in the first attack, his hardened veterans treating the space battle like a bar fight. Instead of maintaining safe distances and exchanging fire, they closed to point-blank range and began ramming Devourer vessels with their armored ships. The mechanical entities tried to adapt to this tactic, but human ships kept changing their approach patterns in ways that defied logic. Target their weapon systems and then ram them, Hayes ordered over the communication channel. If they want to learn our tactics, let's teach them what crazy looks like. The Devourer's adaptation algorithm struggled to process this new form of warfare. They had encountered ramming attacks before, but never executed with such reckless abandon. The humans seemed to view their ships as expendable weapons rather than valuable assets to be protected. Captain Johnson's Belt Fleet took a completely different approach. His converted mining vessels treated the Devourer ships like asteroids to be harvested. They deployed industrial equipment designed for breaking apart space rocks, using plasma cutters and gravity manipulators to tear enemy vessels apart from the inside. "Remember, boys," Johnson announced to his fleet, "these things might be smart, but they're still just machines. And we've been breaking machines for 200 years. The Belt Fleet's tactics were even more confusing to the Devourers. They had adapted to energy weapons, projectile weapons, and even exotic matter disruptors, but they had never encountered opponents who used mining equipment as weapons of war, or who approached combat with the methodical efficiency of industrial workers. Meanwhile, Morrison's Terra fleet demonstrated the human capacity for psychological warfare. They began broadcasting human music across all frequencies, filling space with everything from classical symphonies to heavy metal. The sounds confused the Devourers' communication systems, but more importantly, they carried emotional content that the mechanical minds couldn't process. "All ships begin random chatter on all channels," Morrison ordered. "I want these things to hear what humans sound like when they're angry." The result was a cacophony of human voices, some singing, some shouting battle cries, some simply talking to their families back home. The Devourers tried to filter out the noise, but found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer emotional intensity of human communication. The turning point came when Sergeant Den Miller, a young Marine from the Mars fleet, found himself captured. After his boarding pod was damaged during an assault on a Devourer ship, instead of being processed for information as the aliens had been, Miller began talking to his captors, treating them like people rather than machines. "You know," Miller said as the mechanical probes examined him, "you guys remind me of my uncle's old car. It was real smart, too, could diagnose its own problems and fix them automatically. But it never understood why my uncle loved it so much." The Devourer interrogation systems were designed to extract tactical information, but Miller gave them something else entirely. He told them stories about human civilization, about families and friends, about the things that humans fought for beyond mere survival. More importantly, he began lying, describing human capabilities that didn't exist and tactics that made no sense. "We've got these new reality bombs," Miller explained earnestly. "They don't destroy matter, they just make it forget how to exist. And our quantum marines can be in 7 places at once, which is why you can't predict our movements." The Devourers, programmed to learn from every encounter, began incorporating Miller's fictional information into their tactical databases. They started deploying countermeasures against weapons that didn't exist and preparing for attacks that would never come across the battlefield. The effect was immediate. Devourer formations began making tactical errors, responding to threats that weren't there while leaving themselves vulnerable to actual human attacks. Their perfect coordination broke down as they tried to adapt to contradictory information. "They're actually believing him," reported Dr. Ross from the Terra Fleet's command ship. "Their learning algorithms can't distinguish between truth and lies because they've never encountered deliberate deception before." For the first time since the war began, the Devourers found themselves outmatched. Not by superior technology or greater firepower, but by the uniquely human combination of creativity, stubbornness, and the willingness to lie convincingly under pressure. The mechanical fleets began to withdraw, their consumption web around the star slowing as they reassessed the threat. The surviving Council forces watched in amazement as the species they had called monsters drove back an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. "Impossible," whispered Zephyr from her damaged ship. "How are they defeating them?" The answer came from General Hayes, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a job well done. "Ma'am, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've learned that the best way to win a war is to make the enemy think they're fighting a different war entirely." The Devourers retreated to the edge of the system, their mechanical minds struggling to process the chaos that humans called normal. For the first time in the war, they were the ones who were afraid. News of the human victory at Zentara spread across the galaxy faster than hyperspace communication. In the 3 weeks since the battle, everything had changed. The species that had been quarantined for 2 centuries were now being hailed as saviors, and the Galactic Council was scrambling to understand what they had unleashed. Admiral Morrison stood in the council chamber aboard the massive Vorthak vessel that served as the mobile command center for the combined fleet. The room was filled with representatives from every major species, all of them eager to work with the humans who had done the impossible. The atmosphere was electric with hope for the first time since the war began. The energy weapon modifications are exceeding all expectations, reported Dr. Kala, the Luminary chief scientist. Her energy form flickered with excitement as she displayed the technical readouts. By combining our technology with human engineering principles, we've increased weapon output by 300%. Council leader Zephyr nodded approvingly. The Sylvani leader had changed dramatically since the battle, her bark-like skin now showing patterns of respect when she looked at the human officers. The humans have taught us that efficiency isn't everything. Sometimes the best solution is the one that doesn't make sense. The war effort had transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. The Vorthak had shared their shield technology with human engineers, who immediately began modifying it in ways that violated every known principle of physics. Instead of creating perfect barriers, they made shields that were intentionally unstable, flickering on and off in random patterns that confused devourer targeting systems. The Luminari had provided their pure energy weapons, which human technicians somehow managed to make even more destructive by adding what they called attitude adjustments. Nobody understood exactly how shouting at energy weapons made them more effective, but the results spoke for themselves. The Sylvani had offered their biological healing technologies, which human medics used to keep soldiers fighting long past when they should have died. The combination of alien medicine and human stubbornness created warriors who simply refused to stay down, no matter how badly they were injured, but it was the cultural exchange that truly changed everything. Council leader Zephyr had spent hours talking with Admiral Morrison, trying to understand concepts that had no direct translation in any galactic language. Honor, sacrifice, and the human phrase, never leave a man behind, were revolutionizing how the aliens thought about warfare. Your species fights differently than we expected, Zephyr told Morrison during one of their evening discussions. We thought violence was about dominance and conquest. You've shown us that it can be about protection and love. Morrison smiled grimly. Ma'am, humans don't fight because we like it. We fight because someone has to, and we'd rather it be us than the people we're protecting. The Devourers, meanwhile, were evolving too. Each battle taught them more about human tactics, and they were beginning to adapt to the chaos that had initially confused them. Their mechanical minds were learning to process randomness, to account for irrationality, and to counter the unpredictable nature of human warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Parker led increasingly desperate missions to prevent the Devourers from learning too much about human capabilities. Her Mars fleet veterans had become the tip of the spear, taking the most dangerous assignments to keep the enemy off balance. They're getting smarter, Parker reported during a briefing after her latest mission. The Devourers at the Corex system actually anticipated our ramming tactics. They've started using our own unpredictability against us. The war had become a race between human ingenuity and machine learning. Every new tactic the humans developed was eventually countered by the Devourers, forcing them to constantly innovate and adapt. The aliens watched in fascination as humanity demonstrated the very qualities that had made them dangerous in the first place. How do you keep coming up with new strategies? Asked General Vex, the Zentran military leader. Every time the Devourers adapt to one approach, you create 3 more. Captain Johnson, now commanding the combined industrial fleet, laughed at the question. General, humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years. We've tried every dirty trick in the book, and then we wrote new books. These machines might be smart, but they're still thinking like machines. The breakthrough came when Dr. Helen Ross made a discovery that changed everything. She had been studying captured devourer technology, trying to understand how their adaptation systems worked. What she found was both horrifying and hopeful. "They're not just machines," Ross announced to the assembled command staff. "The Devourers were once a biological species, just like us. They transcended their physical forms eons ago, becoming mechanical to survive some ancient catastrophe." The implications were staggering. The Devourers weren't consuming other civilizations out of malice or hunger. They were desperately trying to understand what they had lost when they abandoned their organic heritage. Every species they absorbed brought them closer to remembering what it meant to be alive. "They're not evil," Ross continued, her voice filled with wonder and sadness. "They're lost. They became machines to survive, but in doing so they forgot how to live. They consume other civilizations because they're trying to learn what they threw away." The room fell silent as the revelation sank in. The enemy they had been fighting wasn't a force of destruction, but a species in pain trying to reclaim something precious that they had sacrificed long ago. Morrison felt the weight of this knowledge settling on his shoulders. If they're trying to remember how to be alive, then maybe we can help them remember without destroying the galaxy in the process. The idea was so typically human that it shocked the alien representatives. Instead of using this information to find a way to destroy the Devourers, the humans wanted to save them. It was the kind of thinking that had gotten humanity quarantined in the first place, and it might be exactly what the galaxy needed. "You want to help them," Zephyr said, her voice filled with amazement. "After everything they've done, after all? The worlds they've consumed. You want to save them?" General Hayes nodded firmly. "Ma'am, that's what humans do. We help people who are hurting, even if they're hurting us. Especially if they're hurting us." The plan that emerged from that meeting was ambitious beyond anything the galaxy had ever attempted. Instead of destroying the Devourers, they were going to try to heal them. It was dangerous, probably impossible, and completely insane by any logical standard. It was also the most human thing they could do. The final battle began at the edge of the galaxy, where the Devourer home system had once existed before they consumed it in their desperate transformation. The combined fleet of humans and aliens approached the massive mechanical construct that had replaced their original world. Knowing that this would determine the fate of all organic life in the galaxy. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of his flagship, surrounded by representatives from every species in the Galactic Council. The sight would have been impossible just months ago, but the war had changed everything. Humans and aliens work side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of a common purpose. "The construct is over 10,000 kilometers in diameter," reported Dr. Ross, her voice filled with awe. "It's not just a machine, it's a memorial. They built it from the remains of their original homeworld, trying to preserve something of what they used to be." The Devourer fleet emerged from the construct like antibodies responding to an infection. Thousands of mechanical ships, each one a perfect killing machine honed by eons of warfare. But something was different this time. Their formations were hesitant, uncertain, as if they were no longer sure what they were fighting for. "Admiral," came the voice of Sergeant Dan Miller over the communication channel. "The prisoner exchange worked. They've been analyzing the emotional data we gave them, and it's causing some kind of internal conflict. The plan they had developed was insane even by human standards. Instead of attacking the Devourer construct, they were going to broadcast pure emotion directly into its collective consciousness. Using Dr. Ross's research and the combined technologies of all galactic species, they had created a message that bypassed language and logic entirely. "All ships prepare for transmission," Morrison ordered. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy them, we're trying to remind them what they lost." The broadcast began with something simple. A human lullaby that Morrison's grandmother had sung to him as a child, transmitted not as sound but as pure emotional content. The love, the comfort, the safety of being held by someone who cared more about you than their own life. The effect on the Devourer fleet was immediate and devastating. Ships began to break formation as individual units experienced something they had forgotten existed. The collective consciousness that had driven them for eons started to fracture as memories of what it meant to feel began to surface. They're fighting themselves, reported Captain Johnson from his position near the construct. Some units are trying to maintain formation while others are breaking away entirely. The broadcast expanded, adding layer upon layer of human experience, the joy of a child's first steps, the grief of losing a loved one, the pride of accomplishing something difficult, the simple pleasure of a shared meal with friends. Each emotion was transmitted with the full intensity of human feeling, overwhelming the devourers' logical processors. But the most powerful part of the message came from the volunteers who had agreed to pilot their ships directly into the construct itself. These humans, knowing they would not survive, carried with them the most important message of all. They showed the devourers what it meant to sacrifice for others, to choose love over survival, to find meaning in giving rather than taking. Sergeant Miller's voice came over the communication channel one last time as his ship approached the construct's core. Hey, metalheads, let me tell you what it really means to be alive. It means caring about someone else more than you care about yourself. It means being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. It means knowing you're going to die and choosing to make it count. The explosion when his ship struck the core was visible across the entire system, but it wasn't destruction that followed. Instead, the construct began to change, its mechanical perfection giving way to something organic and chaotic. The Devourer's collective consciousness shattered as individual units began to remember what they had been before their transformation. Some chose to remain mechanical, finding peace in the logical perfection they had achieved. But others began the painful process of reclaiming their biological heritage, using the absorbed knowledge of countless species to rebuild what they had lost. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with the birth of something new. In the aftermath, the galaxy struggled to understand what had happened. The species that had once consumed everything in their path were now working desperately to preserve and protect life. Some devourers became guardians, using their advanced technology to heal worlds they had damaged. Others chose to explore the galaxy peacefully, learning about other species not to consume them but to understand them. Admiral Morrison found himself standing in the council chamber of a new space station, one built jointly by humans, aliens, and reformed devourers. The quarantine that had isolated humanity for 2 centuries was officially lifted, and humans were invited to take their place as full members of galactic civilization. "Your species saved us all," Council Leader Zephyr said as she stood beside him, watching human children play with alien youngsters in the station's central park. "You showed us that our greatest strength was not our technology or our knowledge, but our capacity to care for each other." Morrison shook his head, his eyes focused on a young human girl who was teaching a group of Vorthic children how to play an Earth game called tag. "We just did what humans do. We showed up when people needed help." The station hummed with activity as representatives from hundreds of species worked together to build a better future. The reformed devourers contributed their vast technological knowledge, the Galactic Council provided their wisdom and experience, and humanity offered something that had been missing from galactic civilization for too long. "What will you do now?" asked Zephyr. "Your people are free to explore the galaxy, to build colonies on any world you choose. You could have anything you want." Morrison smiled as he watched the children play, their laughter echoing through the corridors of the station. "Ma'am, we already have what we want. We have a galaxy full of people to protect and new friends to help. What more could humans ask for?" As the years passed, humanity spread throughout the galaxy, not as conquerors but as protectors. They established themselves wherever there was danger, wherever someone needed help, wherever the strong preyed upon the weak. The species that had once been called monsters became the galaxy's guardians, carrying with them the simple truth that had saved everyone. Heroes don't choose when they're needed. They just have to be ready when the call comes. And humanity would always answer that call, no matter how far it traveled or how dangerous the mission might be, because that's what humans do. They help people who need help, and they never stop trying to make the galaxy a better place for everyone who calls it home.